Commander Velthor of the Galactic Defense Corps leaned back in his chair at the orbital station's cantina, the metal creaking under his massive frame. The dim lighting cast long shadows across his scarred reptilian face as he watched the young recruits gathered around his table. Their eager eyes sparkled with curiosity, fresh faces from a dozen different worlds, all hungry for war stories from the legendary veteran. The cantina buzzed with the usual mix of travelers, traders, and off-duty military personnel. Holographic displays flickered overhead, showing news feeds from across the galaxy, while the air hummed with the quiet thrum of the station's massive engines. But at Velthor's table, an expectant silence had fallen. "Commander, please," urged a young Zalarian recruit, his blue skin almost glowing with excitement. "Tell us about the humans. Everyone says you fought them during the great campaigns." Velthor's golden eyes narrowed as he studied the youngster. "You want to know about humans?" His voice carried the weight of bitter experience, each word deliberate and heavy. "Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you when you can't sleep tonight." He reached for his drink with one of his forearms, the amber liquid sloshing in the crystalline glass. The other recruits leaned forward, sensing they were about to hear something extraordinary. A Krillian female with her distinctive shell-like armor clicked her mandibles nervously. Two humanoid Vorthan twins exchanged glances, their telepathic bond allowing them to share their anticipations silently. "It started during the Outer Rim campaign," Velthor began, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper that somehow carried perfectly in the noisy cantina. "This was maybe 15 cycles ago, when the Galactic Defense Corps was still riding high on our victories against the Skrull Rebellion. We thought we were unstoppable." He took a long drink, savoring both the liquid and the memory. "Intelligence. Reports came in about a new species that had appeared in the frontier systems. Some backwater world called Earth, populated by these pale, soft-skinned bipeds. They called themselves humans. A Drachmarian recruit with scales like polished obsidian leaned forward, soft-skinned, like the Altarians." "Softer," Velthor replied with a bitter laugh. "No natural armor, no claws, no venom glands. They looked like they'd evolved from some kind of tree-dwelling prey animal. High Command figured they'd surrender the moment they saw our battle fleet approaching." The commander's claws scraped against the metal table, leaving thin scratches in the surface. The sound made several recruits flinch. "We were so very wrong," he continued, his voice taking on a haunted quality. "Their leader was some human called Deho, just another soft-skinned biped, we figured. Intelligence said he was young for a military commander, barely 40 Earth years. In our culture, that's still considered a child." Velthor paused, lost in the memory. The recruits waited, hanging on his every word. Around them, the cantina continued its normal rhythm, but their table had become an island of tense anticipation. "I was serving aboard the dreadnought Razor's Edge back then," the commander continued. "Part of Admiral Korthok's Third Fleet, 57 ships of the line, including 12 heavy cruisers and 3 planet killers. We'd never lost a campaign." He gestured with his lower right arm toward the viewing port, where distant stars twinkled like scattered diamonds. "It's a human fleet that met us at the edge of their system consisted of maybe 20 ships. Small ones. 2, nothing bigger than a light cruiser. Their flagship was this ugly, boxy thing they called the Soul's Pride. A young Centaurian with 4 eyes blinked in confusion. They faced your entire fleet with 20 ships." "That's what we thought too," Velthor replied, his tail swishing behind him in agitation. Admiral Korthok was actually insulted, he thought. They were mocking us by showing up with such a pathetic force. He ordered a standard intimidation formation, you know. The one where we spread out in a massive line to show our superior numbers. The commander's voice grew darker. But as we approached, something felt wrong. My sensor operator, a brilliant young hegemony female, kept reporting strange readings. Then the human ships weren't running. They weren't even trying to hide behind their planets or moons. They just sat there waiting. He leaned forward, his massive frame looming over the table. That's when I first learned about human psychology. While we were congratulating ourselves on our overwhelming advantage, they were studying us. Every ship formation, every tactical movement, Every communication frequency we used, they were recording it all. Velthar's eyes glazed over as the memory took hold. I remember watching their flagship through the tactical display. It was so small compared to our vessels, so insignificant. But there was something about the way it moved, the precise formation their fleet maintained. It reminded me of the hunting packs from my homeworld, the way they'd circle their prey, patient and calculating. The silence stretched until one of the Vorthan twins finally spoke. "What happened next, Commander?" A grim smile crossed Velthor's reptilian features. Next. This human called Deho taught the entire Galactic Defense Corps a lesson we'll never forget. But that's a story for another drink, younglings. And trust me, you're going to need stronger stuff than what you're having now. The Battle of Vega Prime should have been simple, Velthar continued, his voice growing darker as he stared into his drink. The liquid seemed to swirl with memories of fire and twisted metal. 12 of our finest warships against one human cruiser. The odds were impossible for them. The young recruits shifted in their seats, sensing the change in their commander's tone. The Zalarian's blue skin had paled to an almost white shade. While the Krillian female's mandibles clicked nervously against her shell-like armor, I was commanding the destroyer Void Hunter at the time, Velthair said, his claws tracing absent patterns on the table's surface. We'd been chasing this single human ship for 3 days across the Vega system. The damn thing was fast, I'll give them that, but our sensors showed it was damaged. Hull breaches, failing power systems, the works. He took another drink, longer. This time, Admiral Korthok was furious. Here we were, the pride of the Galactic Defense Corps, being led on a chase by one crippled enemy vessel. He ordered the entire task force to converge on the human ship's position near Vega Prime's asteroid belt. The commander's golden eyes fixed on each recruit in turn. Their captain was a female named Salmon. Intelligence said she was young, maybe 35 Earth years. She'd been in command for less than a year. We figured she was inexperienced, panicking, making rookie mistakes. A low rumble of engines passed overhead as a cargo transport docked with the station. The vibration made the glasses on their table chime softly. But none of the recruits looked away from Velthor's scarred face. When we finally cornered her ship, the Bison's Revenge, near the asteroid field, we expected surrender, the commander continued. Standard protocols surround the enemy, demand their capitulation, then board and interrogate. Simple, clean, by the book. His tail began to lash behind him, a sure sign of agitation among his species. But this human, this salmon, she didn't retreat. She didn't even try to hide behind the asteroids. Instead, she turned her damaged cruiser around and flew straight at our formation. The Drakmarian recruit's obsidian scales rippled with confusion. She attacked against 12 ships? That's what we thought, Velthar replied, his voice taking on a bitter edge. Suicide run. We'd seen it before from other species, when they were desperate. Honorable, but ultimately pointless. He leaned forward, his massive frame casting shadows across the table. I was monitoring the tactical display when she began her charge. The Bison's Revenge was trailing plasma from her damaged engines, leaving this bright orange streak across space. Beautiful in a way, like a comet rushing toward its destruction. The commander's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Admiral Korthok ordered us to hold formation. Let her come, he said. We'll blast her to atoms when she gets within range. Show these humans what happens when they defy the Galactic Defense Corps. One of the Vorthan twins spoke up, his telepathic bond with his brother making their shared curiosity almost tangible. Something went wrong. Velthor's laugh was harsh and bitter.
Oh.
Wrong. Everything went exactly as Salman planned. As she flew toward us, we opened fire. Plasma bolts, particle beams, kinetic rounds, everything we had. The space around her ship lit up like a festival of death. His claws scraped against the table again, leaving deeper grooves this time, but she kept coming. Somehow impossibly. She was dodging most of our fire. Her ship was dancing between our shots like it was alive. Like it could sense where we were aiming before we pulled the triggers. The recruits were completely silent now, even the background noise of the cantina. seeming to fade as Velthor's story drew them in. That's when I realized we weren't chasing her, the commander said, his voice heavy with the weight of hard-learned wisdom. She was leading us. For 3 days, she'd been guiding us exactly where she wanted us to go. He gestured toward the viewing port with one of his 4 arms. The asteroid field around Vega Prime is dense. Thousands of rocks, some as big as cities, all tumbling through space in chaotic patterns. It's a perfect place for an ambush, if you know what you're doing. Velthor's eyes grew distant as the memory took hold. As we followed her deeper into the field, our sensors started picking up strange readings. Metallic signatures that didn't match the natural composition of the asteroids. Energy patterns that seemed too regular, too organized. The Centaurian recruit blinked all 4 of his eyes in sequence. They'd prepared the battlefield. For weeks. Velthor confirmed, his voice barely above a growl. While we were congratulating ourselves on our superior firepower, human engineers had been working around the clock. They'd hollowed out dozens of asteroids and filled them with explosives. Proximity mines, shaped charges, even some kind of gravitational disruptors we'd never seen before. The commander's tail lashed violently behind him. Suman led us right into the middle of their trap. The moment our formation was fully committed to the asteroid field, she transmitted a single code phrase in her native language, something that sounded like poetry. Paused, savoring the dramatic tension. Then the rocks started exploding. The young recruits gasped collectively. Even the experienced soldiers at nearby tables had begun to listen, drawn by the commander's vivid storytelling. It was like watching the birth of a new star, Velthor continued, his voice filled with a mixture of horror and grudging admiration. Asteroids that had been floating peacefully for millions of years suddenly erupted in brilliant flashes of light and energy. The entire field became a maze of fire and twisted metal, his golden eyes fixed on the Krillian female. In 10 minutes, we lost 8 ships. 8. The heavy cruiser Dominator vaporized by a chain reaction of explosives. The destroyer pack leader Shadow Strike in Nightfall, crushed by asteroids that had been rigged to fragment in specific patterns. Velthor's voice cracked slightly. I watched the battleship Emperor's Wrath, Pride of the Fleet, get cut in, half by some kind of directed energy beam that emerged from what we thought was just another space rock. 3,000 crew members gone in an instant. The silence stretched until the Zalarian recruit finally found his voice. "How did you survive, Commander?" Velthor replied simply. "And the fact that Soma needed witnesses. She could have killed us all, but she let 4 ships escape. I think she wanted us to go back and tell our story, to spread the word about what humans are capable of." He stood slowly, his massive frame unfolding like some ancient predator rising from slumber. That was our first real lesson about human warfare. They don't just fight, they orchestrate. Every move, every decision, every apparent mistake is part of a larger plan that we can't see until it's too late. The commander looked down at the stunned faces around the table. That younglings was just the beginning of our education. But the real terror came later, Velthor whispered, his voice so low that the young soldiers had to lean forward and strain to catch every word. The commander's golden eyes seemed to lose their focus, as if he was seeing something far beyond. The cantina walls. Humans don't just wage war with weapons, they wage it with minds. The recruits exchanged nervous glances. Even the usual chatter from other tables had died down, as if the entire cantina was holding its breath. The only sounds were the distant hum of the station's life support systems and the occasional clink of glasses from the bar. After the disaster at Vega Prime, High Command pulled back our forces, Velthor continued, his forearms resting heavily on the table. We needed time to regroup, to understand what we were really fighting. The brass-figured humans were just good with explosives and tactics. They had no idea what was coming next. He paused to take another drink, and the recruits noticed his hands were trembling slightly. For a warrior who had faced countless battles across the galaxy, this small sign of fear was deeply unsettling. 6 months after Vega Prime, strange reports started coming in from our homeworld, Drakmoria, the commander said. Nothing major at first. Security guards reporting movement in empty corridors. Maintenance crews finding equipment moved overnight. computer systems glitching in ways our technicians couldn't explain. The Krillian female clicked her mandibles nervously. Sabotage. Velthor shook his massive head. That's what we thought too. But when we investigated, we found no evidence of tampering. No foreign technology. No damaged systems. No trace of outside interference. It was like the problems were coming from inside our own minds. His tail coiled and uncoiled behind him. A habit that the recruits had learned meant their commander was deeply disturbed by whatever memory he was reliving. Then the sightings began, he continued, his voice dropping even lower. Soldiers on patrol claimed they saw figures moving in the shadows of our great temple complexes. But when backup arrived, there was nothing there. Security cameras showed empty hallways. Yet the guards swore they had seen something. The young Zalarian's blue skin had turned almost white. What kind of figures? That's the terrifying part, Velthor replied, his golden eyes fixing on each recruit in turn.
They describe creatures from our oldest legends.
The Shadow Walkers. From our ancient mythology, beings that were supposed to be just stories, we told younglings to keep them from wandering alone in the dark. A chill seemed to settle over their table. The Drakmarian recruits' obsidian scales rippled with unease. While the Vorthon twins unconsciously moved closer together, their telepathic bond probably sharing their growing fear. It took us weeks to realize what was happening. The commander, continued, human operative named Jinwoo had infiltrated our homeworld. Not with advanced technology or superior strength, but by understanding our deepest fears. Velthor leaned back in his chair, and it creaked ominously under his weight. This Jinwoo character was remarkable in the most terrifying way possible. He looked nothing like us. Soft pink skin, strange round eyes, that peculiar patch of fur they grow on their heads. But somehow, he had spent years studying our culture. The commander's voice took on a tone of grudging respect mixed with genuine horror. He knew our legends better than most of our own scholars. He understood which stories frightened us as children, which taboos made us uncomfortable as adults, which symbols held power over our collective psyche. One of the Vorthon twins spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. How did he use this? Knowledge? Psychological warfare like nothing we'd ever seen, Velthar replied. Ginwu would leave small items in places where our soldiers would find them. Ancient symbols carved into walls, old artifacts placed in significant locations. Recordings of traditional songs played at frequencies just below conscious hearing. The commander's claws scraped against the table as he gestured. He never showed himself directly. Instead, he became a ghost in our own machines. Our security systems would malfunction in ways that created shadows that looked like mythological creatures. Our communication networks would carry whispers in dead languages that only our oldest priests could understand. The cantina around them had grown completely silent now. Even the bartender, a massive Quellian with 6 arms, had stopped polishing glasses to listen to the tale. Within months, our own people were seeing ghosts in every shadow, hearing whispers. In empty corridors, Velthar continued, his voice heavy with the weight of bitter memory. Soldiers who had faced plasma fire without flinching were jumping at their own reflections. Elite commandos were refusing to patrol certain sections of our bases because they claimed the walls were watching them. The Centaurian recruit blinked. All 4 eyes in disbelief. One human caused all that? Jinwoo never fired a shot, the commander confirmed, his tail lashing behind him. Never planted a bomb, never hacked a critical system, never directly threatened a single life. Entire military installations became paralyzed by paranoia. He turned our own psychology against us. Velthor stood slowly and walked to the cantinas. Viewing port. Through the reinforced glass, stars wheeled slowly as the station rotated, providing artificial gravity for its inhabitants. The commander stared out at the cosmos for a long moment before continuing. The worst part was that we knew it was psychological warfare. But knowing didn't help, he said, his reflection ghost-like in the transparent aluminum. Even our most rational officers started seeing things. Even our best scientists began hearing voices in the static of their equipment. He turned back to face the recruits, his scarred features grim in the cantina's dim lighting.
Ow.
Our high command tried everything. They brought in psychologists, meditation experts, even shamans from the outer colonies. Nothing worked. The fear had taken root too deeply. The commander returned to his seat, the chair groaning under his weight. Jinwoo had studied us so thoroughly that he knew exactly which buttons to push. He understood that we Dracomarians have always been afraid of the space between spaces, the darkness that exists in the corners of perception. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, and he filled those dark corners with our own nightmares. Young soldiers sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had heard. The idea that one human could cripple an entire military force without violence seemed impossible, yet the haunted look in their commander's eyes told them it was all too real. How did it end? The Krillian female finally asked. Velthor's bitter laugh echoed through the quiet cantina. It didn't end. Jinwoo simply vanished one day, like smoke dissolving in the wind, left behind no trace, no evidence he had ever been there. But the damage was done. It took years for our forces to regain their confidence, and even now some of our veterans still see shadows where there should be none. The commander raised his glass in a mock toast. That was our second lesson about human warfare younglings. They don't just attack your body or your ships. They attack the very foundations of who you think you are. Velthor's voice cracked slightly as he continued. The sound like ancient armor finally giving way under too much pressure. The worst part? We thought we were winning. Battle after battle, we pushed them back. Our generals celebrated each victory like they were conquering heroes. The commander's four hands wrapped around his glass, and the recruits could see the tremor running through his massive frame. Even in the cantina's dim lighting, the scars that crisscrossed his reptilian hide seemed to pulse with old pain. 2 full cycles, the war reports were nothing but good news, he said, his golden eyes staring into the depths of his drink. The humans were retreating from system after system. We reclaimed the Proxima colonies, drove them out of the Centauri trade routes, even pushed them back to the edge of their own solar system. The young Zalarian recruit leaned forward eagerly. That sounds like you were winning, Commander. Velthor's bitter laugh echoed through the quiet cantina. That's exactly what we thought, youngster. Admiral Korthok was already planning his victory parade. The Defense Council was discussing how to divide up human territory. We were drunk on our own success, he gestured with one of his lower arms, toward a holographic display showing galactic sector maps. Look at those star charts. See how neat and organized our advance looks? How perfectly our forces spread across human space? We thought it was brilliant strategy on our part. The commander's tail lashed behind him as darker memories surfaced. We didn't realize humans were studying us. Every engagement, every tactic we used, every formation we deployed, they were learning. Human strategist named Haijin was documenting our every move, building a profile of our entire military doctrine. The Krillian female's mandibles clicked nervously. How could they study you while retreating? Because they weren't really retreating, Velthor replied, his voice heavy with the weight of hard-earned wisdom. They were conducting the largest military experiment in galactic history. With us as their test subjects, he stood and began pacing. Behind his chair, his massive form casting shifting shadows across the table. Every battle we won, we fought exactly the same way. Standard Dracmarian tactics, overwhelming force, direct assault, victory through superior numbers and firepower. It had worked for centuries against dozens of species. The commander paused, his claws gripping the back of his chair so tightly that the metal groaned. But this Haijin, she was different from any enemy we'd ever faced. While our soldiers were celebrating their victories, she was analyzing every sensor reading, every communication intercept, every tactical decision we made. One of the Vorthan twins spoke up, his telepathic bond with his brother, allowing them to share their growing unease. What was she looking for? Patterns, Velthor replied simply. Human minds work differently than ours. Where we see individual battles, they see data points.
Tactical.
Where we see tactical victories, they see behavioral studies. Was building a psychological profile of our entire military machine. The commander returned to his seat, the chair creaking under his weight. She studied how our commanders reacted under pressure, how our formations adapted to different threats, how our supply lines functioned under stress. She learned to predict our responses with mathematical precision. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The humans had turned warfare into a science, and we were their laboratory rats. The young Drakmarian recruit's obsidian scales rippled with confusion. But surely our experienced generals would have noticed something was wrong. Velthor's golden eyes fixed on the youngster with something approaching pity. Experience can be a weakness when your enemy is learning faster than you are. Our generals had centuries of successful campaigns behind them. They knew what worked, what didn't, what to expect from inferior species. He took a long drink before continuing. But humans don't follow the rules that other species do. Our commanders were relying on tried and tested strategies. Hyjin was developing entirely new forms of warfare based on her understanding of our psychology. The cantina's atmospheric recyclers hummed softly overhead, but the sound seemed amplified. In the growing silence around their table, other patrons had gradually moved closer, drawn by the commander's tale of military disaster. The breakthrough came during the Battle of Kepler Station, Velthor continued, his voice taking on a haunted quality. We thought we had them cornered. 3 human battle groups trapped in a nebula with nowhere to run. Our fleet was 4 times their size, with superior firepower and fresh reinforcements only hours away. His hands trembled slightly as he set down his glass. When they finally struck back, it wasn't random. They knew exactly how we would respond to every situation. It was like fighting an enemy who could read our thoughts. The commander's tail coiled around his chair leg, a defensive gesture his species used when feeling particularly vulnerable. The moment our lead ships entered the nebula, the humans deployed a tactic we'd never seen before. Instead of fighting us directly, they created a series of false sensor readings that made us think we were facing a much larger force. He gestured with his upper arms, painting invisible battle formations in the air. Our Admiral Korthok responded exactly as Hyjin had predicted. He ordered a standard defensive formation, ships arranged in a protective sphere with our heaviest units at the center. It was textbook Drakmarian doctrine. The Centaurian recruit blinked all 4 eyes in sequence. That sounds like good tactics. Would have been against any other enemy, Velthar replied grimly. But Hyjin had studied that exact formation in dozens of our previous battles. She knew its weaknesses better than our own tactical officers did. The commander's voice grew stronger as he relived the tactical nightmare. The humans hit us with coordinated strikes at precisely the points where our formation was most vulnerable. Not the obvious weak spots that any strategist might target, but the subtle flaws in our doctrine that only someone with complete understanding of our psychology could exploit. His claws scraped against the table as he leaned forward. They knew that when attacked from above, our commanders would instinctively rotate the formation to bring more guns to bear. So they attacked from below first, forcing us to turn, then hit us from the sides when our ships were out of position. One recruit dared to speak, but surely your superior numbers mean nothing. Velthor cut him off, his voice rising with emotion. When your enemy knows you better than you, know yourself. Hyjin had turned our greatest strength into our greatest weakness. The commander slumped back in his chair, suddenly looking every one of his advanced years. In 6 hours, we lost 60% of our fleet.
How does your firepower
Or advanced technology, but to an enemy who had learned to think like us, predict our moves, and counter our strategies before we even made them. He raised his glass with a shaking hand. That was our 3rd lesson about human warfare, younglings. They don't just fight you. They become you, understand you, and then use that understanding to destroy you from within. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of ships docking and departing from the station's many bays. The recruits sat in stunned contemplation, trying to process the implications of what they had heard. How many of you survived? The Krillian female finally asked. Velthar's bitter smile was answer enough. Just enough to carry the tale back to high command. Just enough to serve as living proof of human capabilities. I think that was part of Hyjin's plan too. The old warrior looked around the table at each young face before delivering his final revelation, his golden eyes reflecting depths of knowledge that seemed almost too heavy to bear. The cantina had grown completely silent now, as if the entire station was holding its breath for what was coming next. You want to know the most terrifying truth about humans? Velthar asked, his voice carrying the weight of decades spent learning hard lessons. The war never ended. The recruits exchanged confused glances. The Zalarian's blue skin had turned, almost translucent with shock, while the Krillian female's mandibles clicked in a rapid, nervous rhythm against her shell-like armor. "But Commander," the young Drakmarian protested, his obsidian scales rippling with confusion. "The peace treaties were signed 15 cycles ago. The trade agreements, the cultural exchanges, the joint defense pacts. Surely that means the war is over?" Velthor's laugh was hollow, echoing through the quiet cantina like the sound of distant thunder. "That's exactly what they wanted us to think, youngster. That's the true genius of human warfare. Their greatest victories are the ones you never see coming." The commanders for arms gestured toward the viewing port, where ships from dozens of different species moved in orderly patterns around the massive orbital station. "Look out there. See all those vessels working together? Drakmarine freighters carrying goods alongside human cargo ships, Krillian patrol boats escorting mixed convoys, Zalarian research vessels sharing data with Terran science ships." His voice dropped to barely a whisper, forcing the recruits to lean forward. "Humans didn't just defeat us, they absorbed us. And we thank them for it." The Vorthan twins shared one of their telepathic communications, their mental bond allowing them to process the shocking revelation together. One of them finally found the courage to speak. "How is that possible?" "Our governments negotiated those treaties in good faith, did they?" Velthair asked, his tail coiling around his chair leg in that defensive gesture his species used when deeply disturbed. "That diplomat who negotiated our surrender? Ambassador Krell of the Hegemony Council? He'd been attending cultural seminars on Earth for 2 years before the peace talks even began?" The commander's claws scraped against the table as he leaned forward. Those seminars weren't just about learning human customs. They were intensive psychological conditioning programs designed by a human strategist named Taejun, who had been planning this for decades. A chill seemed to settle over their table, despite the cantina's controlled atmosphere. The background hum of the station's life support system suddenly seemed ominous rather than comforting. "The new trade agreements that seem so favorable to our species," Velthar continued, his voice gaining strength as the full scope of the human deception became clear. "Designed by human economists who understood exactly how to make exploitation look like generosity. We thought we were getting the better deal, but every contract slowly shifted economic power toward human corporations." The Centaurian recruit blinked all 4 eyes in rapid succession, a sign of deep distress among his people. "The cultural exchange programs too? Especially those," the commander replied grimly. "Thousands of our brightest youngsters sent to human universities. Tens of thousands of human students and researchers welcomed into our most prestigious institutions. We called it friendship. They called it infiltration." Velthar stood slowly, his massive scarred frame unfolding like some ancient predator rising from slumber. Around the cantina, other patrons had stopped their conversations entirely, drawn into the commander's tale of systematic conquest. "This Taejun character was remarkable in the most terrifying way possible," he continued, beginning to pace behind his chair. "While we were fighting his military forces in space, he was already planning the peace that would follow. Every human defeat, every tactical withdrawal, every apparent concession during the peace negotiations, all of it was orchestrated to achieve a single goal." The commander paused at the viewing port, his reflection ghost-like in the transparent aluminum. Complete domination without a single shot fired after the treaties were signed. His voice took on an almost admiring tone, the grudging respect of one strategic mind for another. "Taejun studied every species in this sector for decades. He understood our politics better than our own leaders did. He knew which of our officials could be influenced, which of our cultural values could be exploited, which of our economic weaknesses could be leveraged."
Ow.
The young soldiers sat in stunned silence, trying to process the implications of what they were hearing. The idea that their entire civilization had been subtly conquered without their knowledge seemed impossible, yet the haunted certainty in their commander's voice made it all too believable. "The joint defense agreements were perhaps the most brilliant stroke," Velthar continued, turning back to face his audience. "We thought we were creating mutual protection pacts. In reality, we were integrating our military command structures. with human oversight, our fleet movements, our strategic planning, our intelligence networks, all of it now flows through systems that humans designed and control. The Krillian female's voice was barely above a whisper. How long have you known? I started suspecting about 5 cycles ago, the commander replied, his golden eyes reflecting decades of careful observation. Small things at first, changes. In protocol that seemed minor but fundamentally altered how information flowed through our command structure, new communication systems that were supposedly more efficient but gave human technical advisors access to everything. He returned to his seat, the chair groaning under his weight. Then I began noticing patterns in our strategic decisions. Every time our military leaders proposed actions that might conflict with human interests, there would be delays, bureaucratic complications, budget constraints that forced us to reconsider. A Kothar's tail lashed behind him as darker memories surfaced. I started tracking the career paths of our most promising officers. Do you know what I found? Every single one had attended training programs on human worlds or worked closely with human advisors. Every single one now makes decisions that align perfectly with human strategic goals, and they don't even realize it. The commander's voice grew stronger, more urgent, as if he was running out of time to deliver a critical warning. The humans didn't just study our military tactics during the war. They studied our entire civilization. Our psychology, our culture, our decision-making processes, our deepest fears, and greatest aspirations. He gestured toward the other patrons in the cantina, a diverse mix of species from across the galaxy, all seemingly coexisting in peaceful harmony. Look around you. See how naturally we all work together now? How smoothly our different cultures have integrated? It didn't happen by accident. The Dracomarian recruit's scales had turned a pale gray with fear. Are you saying we're all slaves? Worse, Velthar replied, his voice heavy with the weight of terrible understanding. We're willing collaborators who don't even know we've been conquered. Every species in this sector now dances to human music, and most don't even realize the tune has changed. The old warrior stood once more, his scarred form towering over the stunned recruits. The cantina around them had fallen completely silent, every patron straining to hear the commander's final words. That, younglings, is the true horror of human warfare, he said, his voice carrying across the entire room. They don't just defeat their enemies, they transform them into allies, who serve human interests while believing they're acting of their own free will. Velthar looked down at each young face in turn, seeing his own dawning horror reflected in their eyes. The peace you've grown up in, the prosperity you've known, the opportunities you've been given, all of it exists because it serves human purposes. And the most terrifying part is that it's probably better than what we had before. He began walking toward the cantina's exit, his heavy footsteps echoing in the silence. Sleep well tonight, recruits. Try not to think about how many of your own thoughts might not be entirely your own. Try not to wonder what other human strategies are still unfolding around us, invisible and inevitable. As the massive commander disappeared through the cantina's entrance, the recruits sat in shocked silence. Around them, the normal sounds of the orbital station gradually resumed conversations. Laughter, the clink of glasses, but something fundamental had changed in their understanding of the galaxy they lived in. The Zalarian recruit was the first to speak, his voice barely audible. Do you think he's right? The Vorthan twins exchanged another telepathic communication before one of them answered. Does it matter? If he's right, there's nothing we can do about it. If he's wrong, we'll never know for sure. They sat in contemplative silence for several more minutes, each lost in their own thoughts about peace, war, and the terrifying possibility that the two might be the same thing viewed from different perspectives. Finally, they began to disperse, heading back to their quarters to try to sleep. Despite the revolutionary ideas now churning in their minds, none of them noticed the human technician sitting alone at a corner table, quietly recording their conversation on a device that looked remarkably similar to a standard-issue communication tablet. After all, someone had to monitor how well the truth was being received. Tayshawn's strategies were still unfolding, even after all these years. and human patience was perhaps their greatest weapon of all. The Eandera Treeclawed can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.